Happy equivalent Friday. Hopefully you all had a nice holiday, a nice day off to rejuvenate the brain. We are going to start where we left off on Tuesday with any questions. Did anything pop up while you were working on your projects? Did you get stuck anywhere? Is there anything that you would be curious to see how I would approach it? Do you want to see me do any of those projects? How are we feeling about Tuesday's class?
I wouldn't mind seeing you do one or two of those.
Okay. Does anyone have a strong preference? I will pull up the project list. Anyone in particular calling out to you guys where you're like, ooh, I want to see Max do that one?
Can you try the polling app one? Just want to make sure.
Sure. So build an interface that lets you enter a question and answer and as many answers as you'd like. Have a start poll button that allows you to click on the answer and display the number of votes that option got. So I am going to go at a speed here where I do not anticipate you follow, but I'm just going to kind of show you the steps of how I think through this, right? So in my head, I'm thinking, okay, we need to build the interface, and there are kind of two modes the interface can be in, right? It can either be it can either be in entry mode where you're like setting up the poll, or it can be in question mode where you are answering basically or voting for the thing. So I'm gonna pop open VS Code. I'm gonna close all of this stuff. I'm gonna jump into day 4. I will call this polling. Get my file set up. I will start a live share just in case you guys find it easier to read from that, but no expectations of you following along with me here. Come on, get out of here. Okay. Script.js. We'll put our template in. We will link our script.js. Go live. And then we're going to say, all right, we are going to start in a input type text with a placeholder of enter question here. And maybe we will, just going to do this inline styling, target the input and throw an ID of question on this. And then target the ID of question and add the width of 100%. Okay, decent starting point. Then I will say, let's add maybe a button that says add poll answer. Okay. And we'll put a placeholder in here of poll answers so that we can hook into it in our JavaScript. Then in my JavaScript, I am going to add a on click in the button that says add poll answer, which is going to fire off an event. We are going to say let poll answers equal, and we're going to make it equal an array. And so in this case, we need to be careful of our data types, right? And so we want a list of different poll options because there's any number of options available. But then we also need to be careful because we don't want to keep track of just the text in that poll option. We also want to be able to keep count of how many times that option has been voted for. So in my add poll answer, function, I'm going to say, hey, every time we want to add a poll answer, we're going to go to poll answers and we're going to push something that has the text, which is going to be empty, and the count, which is going to start at 0. Then we're going to make a thing called generate HTML that is going to loop over every answer of the poll answers. And it is going to say, let generated HTML start as empty. And we are going to go to our generated HTML and add on a input with a type of text. And we will throw a data index on that so we can keep track of the poll answers so we know which one they're typing into. Index answer. Don't know if we're going to need that yet, but we're going to start with it. And then we can put all of that maybe in a form. Okay, let's save that. I am going to, once we loop over everything, I am going to document get element by ID of my poll answers. And I'm going to set the inner HTML of that equal to the generated HTML. And finally, after I push my poll answer in, I need to call the generate HTML function. Okay, so let's break down what we're doing so far here. We'll just make all inputs a width of 100%, and then add a placeholder on this with answer number index +1. Is index not coming out as a number? That's interesting. Okay, let's talk through that. I know that that was really quick, but we'll do a quick overview before we switch it into quiz mode, right? This is my approach. This is not the only approach to this solution, right? That does not necessarily mean that my approach is better. This is just the first thing that came to me. And oftentimes in a technical interview, you'll get done everything, and then they'll say, okay, well, what would you do either if you had more time or if you wanted to refactor it, right? And so good engineering companies will realize that your first attempt at anything is never particularly good, right? It's like making pancakes. The first pancake is never going to be good. It's always the second one where it starts getting good. Same goes for your engineering, right? Now, if I were doing this in a technical interview, I would typically write out the steps first to show the interviewer, hey, I can kind of plan through all of this before I start executing on it. Because oftentimes when you start planning through things, you start realizing that you have questions that would be better to get answers to sooner in an interview as opposed to later in an interview. But yes, this is a good example of a project. Almost all of these are good examples of projects you may get in a technical interview or what they call a whiteboard coding interview where they don't actually want you to write the code, but they want you to kind of plan through the code and say, hey, I need to write a for loop here. Some companies will say, we don't care what language you use to take our technical tests. Some of them will say, well, we use JavaScript here, so we want you to write it in JavaScript. So I am going to, Joe, I'm not sure if I understand your question. For loop an if statement to check if input has value.
Instead of putting a blank input, 'cause I think that's what you had. That's what it was doing, right? When you hit add poll or whatever it was. If you put the for const index answer of object entries poll answers, with that whole for loop and an if statement to check and see if the whatever input had the event listener on it, to check and see if there's anything in it first. So that way you don't just have a bunch of empty generated.
Well, we want an empty input to show, because if we said, like, what's your favorite color? And we hit add poll answer, we still want to be able to like type a color in. The problem that we're going to run into is
I see what's happening there. I gotcha.
When we hit add poll answer again, it's actually going to clear this out. So that's the first bug that we need to solve for. What we are going to do is add a value on this that is going to equal the whatever is stored in the answer here. And then we need to update that answer when this input changes. So I'm going to start breaking this up so it's a little bit easier to read. And then I'm going to say on change of this input.
You have to
Fire off a function called answer updated. Then say const answer updated is going to equal an event that is going to get the index from the event target get attribute. And we're going to grab the data index from right here. Data index. And make sure that logs out properly. Ooh. Answer.text. And we do get 0 logging out. Okay. So we are going to say answers bracket index, grab the text and set equal to whatever the event target value is. 1, 2, 3, add poll answer. Answers is not defined on 25. Poll answers. Poll answers. Okay, now that is saving through. All right, let's talk through this before we switch the mode over. So we started out with something really easy, right? We start out with this input that's going to take the question text. We put an empty form in place so that we can have a place to push the answers in. Then we add a button that basically says, hey, I want to be able to click this button 3 times and get 3 inputs that I can type my questions into. You could do this a little differently. You could have a form that says add answer, and you type in whatever you want and hit the enter button, and that saves the answer in place. This is more thinking of like create, read, update, delete operations. So both approaches are totally valid here. But when I think about building out like a quiz for you guys, right? I think about saying, oh, there are 4 answers to this, so I'm going to hit the add button 4 times. Different UXs, UIs, either one is totally fine. And then I link into the JavaScript. Then what I do is I say, hey, I gotta fire off some JavaScript when an add poll answer happens, which is again attached to this button right here. We are keeping track of everything that we have done in our JavaScript state, our JavaScript variable, and then generating out the HTML based off of what data is in there. So I keep track of my poll answers up here as an array, but when we go to add in a new answer, we push on to the end of this array, and we need to keep track of 2 things for each one of the answers. How many times have they voted for that, right? The count, and also the text. The text is going to start out as empty because they haven't entered anything. Then we generate HTML, which is going to come down to this function. We put it in its own function because we may need to call this multiple times. We say generated HTML is going to start out as an empty string, go over each one of the poll answers that is in the array. Give us access to the index so we know, hey, this is answer 0, 1, 2, 3, whatever, and also give us access to the entire answer, which is going to be this object up here. Then we say, hey, for each one of those answers, generate out an input with a type of text, throw this data index on so that when they do type into it, we know which one they're typing into. Throw a placeholder in that says answer number and then uses the index and adds 1 to it because we're 0 indexing. So that placeholder is how answer number 3 is showing up right there. That is the placeholder from right here. The template literal is just letting me add in a JavaScript value into my string. We also set the value equal to the text. So it's going to start out as an empty string. And then we say, hey, on change of this input, when someone types into this input, fire off this answer updated. This answer updated is going to come down here. It's going to grab out the data index so it knows which answer we are updating, which is going to be coming from the data index right here. And then it says, hey, once you know which one we're updating, update the text value to whatever was typed into this input. And so we have our interface so far. Any questions on that before we switch it to quiz mode? Is this helpful? Is this what you were expecting? Okay, so we are going to add in a button. That says start quiz. We are going to add a on click to that of start quiz. We will say start quiz is going to it is going to generate different HTML this time. And this time it's going to kind of clear everything out here. So we're going to say start with the generated HTML by making it equal to, I don't know, an H5 that has our document get element by ID, the question, grab the inner HTML of that and set it into this H5 that we just created. Why am I doing this? Because I don't want the question to be editable after the poll starts. So what I'm basically doing is saying reach in to the question that's already on the page and pull out, shouldn't say in our HTML, pull out the value, pull out whatever was typed into it, then drop all of that into an H5. Then I want to loop over all of my poll answers again. And say, I'm gonna add everything to a unordered list and then say generated HTML plus equals a list item with the poll.text and a button with the poll answer.text and answer.count and close out the li, close out the ul, and then document.body nope, don't want to do it in the body because that's going to remove my script tag. Go over this in 1 second. Let me just make sure it works. A, B, C. 1, 2, 3. Okay, yeah, it's doing what I wanted. Okay, so let's talk through this little section. So we added everything in a div ID main. That way I could target this section and say, hey, clear out everything that's in the quiz building interface and replace it with this new section, right? And so what I did here is I said, hey, when the start quiz button is clicked, we come down here, we start generated HTML over again from scratch. We say, hey, at the top of the generated HTML, I want an H5, and then go get the element by ID, which is the question, go get whatever was typed into that, which is the value of it, and drop it into an H5. Then start an unordered list, which is these bullet points that are showing up here. Then say, hey, in that list item, go grab the text. Where is the text coming from? That text was getting updated whenever an answer got typed into, whenever an answer was changed in the form. Well, where did we get the change on the form? We did that in the on change right here. Oop, that should be a lowercase. Okay, so the on-change trickles down to the answer updated. The answer updated is keeping track of this variable called poll answers. Poll answers is then getting used when we loop over it to pull out the text of that answer and also the count of the button. Now, finally, all we need to do is add an on-click of the on-click vote. And we also need to get access to the index again by using the object.entries, pass in the index, space this out so it's a little bit easier to read. and say const vote is going to grab the event. We're going to get the index from the event target, get attribute data index. And then we are going to say answers index count equals plus equals 1. And finally regenerate the quiz. Okay, so fave color, black, white, and pink, because those are the only 3 options. Black, white, pink shows up. If we click on a number, not read properties value on 31. Ew. That was a bad decision. So the problem is it is trying to go back and now get the element ID question value, and that question doesn't exist because I replaced it with the H5 instead. So instead, I think I need to do an if statement where I say, if there is a element of or let's do it like this. Let question element. Oh, I can do it. Can do it like this. I will explain that in a second if it works. Okay. This is why I prep for projects before we do them in class, because I know that this feels like a whirlwind, but I am going to try and step us through it. So after we hit the start quiz button, we start out our generated HTML as empty. Then we say, hey, go get whatever the question element is with the ID of question on it. Now we're going to take that question and put it into a new H5, still with the ID of question on it. And what we're going to fill that H5 with is either the questions element value. What's the value going to be the first time this runs? It's going to be whatever is typed into this input here. So we ignored this second part because the question element has a value in it. Then we generate out all of our list items with the button that is going to display the answers count. Then we're done with this until this on-click of the vote fires. The on-click of the vote is going to grab out the index so it knows which one we are voting on. It is going to add 1 to the count of that, and then it needs to update that HTML again, right? Because all we did was we added 1 to the count up here. We haven't told the button, hey, button, you now have a new value. So we come down to the start quiz again. Start quiz now comes up here, goes, oh, I need to go get the element by ID question. This time it's an H5. So that H5 doesn't have a value because it's not a form input. So instead, what it does is it grabs out the inner HTML because it doesn't have a value, and it puts that back into the H file. Finally, it generates out the list items, but this time the list item, the answer count is going to be incremented by 1 because we already added it down here. So we come over here and we get what we expect. I know black isn't technically a color, it's the absence of color, but you know. And now we can click to vote on what we would like. Super easy. I don't know what you're complaining about. I will say that there was more than one student that got it done last night within the class time. Let me pull up. And I also put it at the bottom of the easy list. So it was meant to be that every project you went down, it got incrementally harder. I almost made it like a 1 through 5 scale because I do recognize that this is much harder to do than this. But it is something that you have all of the knowledge to do it. It comes down to 2 things, right? One is a lot of programming is just stamina, right? It's just perseverance of I'm getting an error, I fix the error, now I'm getting another error, I got to fix that error. I said in the first cohort all the time, we celebrate different errors, right? Because before you move on to the next problem, you want to go, wait, I want to take whatever I learned from doing this project, let it soak in, pat myself on the back a little bit and go, I fixed that problem. Before I go deal with the next one, I want to give myself some credit that it's a different error. That means I fixed this first one. Let me make sure it has fully soaked in before I move on to the next problem, right? And so you could see as I was doing this live, I was getting errors, right? That this is not something that when you see me writing code in class on a pre-planned project, well, I got all of the errors when I did the project before class, and now I know what ones I'm going to get or how to avoid them. The good news is you also saw how quickly I could deal with those errors. It's because I have run into errors like that before. So you do build up a knowledge base of experience, right? Of, oh, I know what that problem is, instead of having to pachinko all the way down the code and figure out what line it's on and what the error is trying to tell me and all of that. You get that error so many times that you go, oh, I can just skip to the end. I know what the solution is here. I don't necessarily need to pull the thread all the way through to get to that problem. So the only reason why I made this an easy is because JavaScript concept-wise, you're really only dealing with a couple things. You're dealing with objects and arrays, with variables, basic data structures. You're dealing with for loops, and you're dealing with events, right? Which is what happens when they click this button, what needs to show up, and the document object model. So there are 5-ish JavaScript concepts in here, and you go, well, how is that easy? You just wrote 52 lines of code to make all of that work. Yes, but extract it down to the concepts, right? Because a lot of those concepts we're just using over and over again. So when we start at the top, an array, right? Basic JavaScript variable. We go into add poll answer. This is a function and also an event that's going to be triggered by the button press. Poll answers.push. Again, we're back to arrays and we are pushing in an object. So back to JavaScript variables. Generate HTML is a function. That function is going to use a string, another variable type, a for loop. This one's a slightly more advanced because we're using dot entries to get out the index and the answer. But within that, we're using template literal, another kind of a fancy string. We're using document object model properties like the data.index here. We're using, again, variables again, or data types. we have to parse the integer out because the number is not coming out as a number. The number is in a string. So we're converting the data type there. We're using things like value and on change. These are basic HTML properties that allow us to interface our JavaScript into our HTML to get that interactivity. And then the document object model here. Go ahead with your question. You are unmuted, but I can barely hear you. You might have to pull your mic down.
Sorry.
There you go.
I was going over the object.entries, and is it referring to poll answers as an object? Like when you make a variable, is it an object, or is it because you put the brackets there?
So object.entries, this is one that I think people like to overcomplicate. They think that it's doing more than it actually is. So poll answers is technically an array here. But what object.entries will always do is give us access to the index of the item in the array and the item itself that we're trying to loop over, right? So if we say something like, if I just pop open a random blank console, right? And I say, let animals equal dog, cat, and elephant. Okay, well, if I wanted to get cat out, it makes sense that I would say animals bracket 1, and I get my cat, right? Okay, well, now I want to loop over each one of these. So I say for let animal of animals, console log out my animal, and run that for loop. And I get my dog, cat, elephant. Okay, makes total sense, right? Now, what happens if I want to know that dog is my first animal, cat is my second, and elephant is my third? Well, in a for of style loop, we don't get access to the index. We only get access to the value in the array itself, right? So what we can do is we can say object.entries give us access to all of our animals. And it comes back with array2, array2, array2. I'm like, well, that's not helpful, right? But if we look inside those arrays, it is giving us 0 dog, 1 cat, 2 elephant. So what we are doing in right here is what we call destructuring. Okay, well, what is structuring? It's the format, right? It's the bones, it's the foundation, it's the layout of the data. Well, when we destructure, we're just breaking apart the format of that data. So what we're doing here is saying, hey, because we are looping over it, right? We're saying of. That means that when this first runs, I'm going to get this array with 0 and dog. But what I'm able to do is say, because there are going to be 2 separate things in that array, break that array down into a variable called index and a variable called answer. So we are basically saying, hey, object.entries is going to give us an array of arrays, but this time the 0 index of that array is going to have the index in it of whatever we're looping over. And the second part of the array is going to have the thing itself, the value of the thing that we are looping over.
You understand it now.
You do?
Yeah, I do.
Good.
Also, I saw in the console that when it printed out your array, it came out in order. Is it always going to be like that, or is it just like
Arrays are always in order.
like the dog,
Objects,
cat, elephant? in this order?
elephant, arrays are always in order. Objects are supposed to be in order of the keys that as you add them, but it's not guaranteed. But arrays are like inherently part of the the data type is that they are always in order, which is why we have so many functions like push and shift and unshift and pop and all of those things. That's
Mhm.
because they're all talking about adding one to the beginning, adding one to the end, taking one off of the end, taking one off the beginning. There is you can do like index of, right, and get a couple of them out. You can do slices and splices, which is stupid because they're two separate functions that do almost the same thing. But slice and splice are two ways of extracting certain data out of the array. And so it is a very common thing in technical interviews, especially whiteboard interviews, to like challenge you with how you can use an array because an array is inherently in order.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course. So a request to go over bracket notation. So bracket notation is always used whenever we are accessing an array. And so bracket notation is kind of interesting in that it can also be used for an object, but it doesn't have to be. So let's explore that a little bit. I can say something like, I already did up here, right? Animals in bracket 1. Because 1 is a number, it now says, oh, go into the array, ignore 0, go get 1, and that's what comes out. However, we could also say something like animal num equals 2. And then we can say console log our animals animal num. And that gets us our elephant. Excuse me. Where is that coming from? Well, because I didn't pass a number in specifically right here, it went up, got the value 2, dropped 2 into animals right here, and said, oh, 0, 1, 2, elephant is your second animal. We can use bracket notation and dot notation for objects as well. So if I say, hey, I have my car, which is a make and model. There are two different ways that I can access the data inside of this object. I can use my dot notation and say, hey, log out my car.model. And I get Y out, right? Because that is the value of the key. However, I can also log out and that does the exact same thing. Well, why would we ever want to use bracket notation when it has 2 extra characters? I need to put it in quotes so it knows, oh, I'm trying to access the key of model. I'm trying to get the value out of that. Well, in general, dot notation is preferred because it's just, well, it's 4 less characters, right? I'm not putting the, well, 3 less characters, I guess. But anyway, I'm not putting quotes. I'm not putting the bracket notation in. When bracket notation is helpful for objects is when we have what we call a dynamic key, which is exactly what we did up here with animal num. Because animal num was coming from a variable, we call that a dynamic key. So what we can do down here is say const data to get equals make. Then based off of that, we can log out the car data to get. Notice this time I do not have quotes here. So it knows, hey, I don't want to actually look for a key called data to get. Instead, what I want to look for is the key of make. So when I log that out, I get the data that I'm expecting. Is that the bracket notation that you were asking about, Joe?
Yeah, it was specifically with in relation to like dot notation as well. So yes. I just needed to see another example of it. Seems much messier than just dot notation.
And that's why dot notation, if you can make it work with that, is definitely preferred. With array indexes, it's really not a problem to use the bracket notation because you're generally working with those numbers. I think because it works with arrays, they were also like, all right, we should make it work with objects as well. And then they started looking at other programming languages and they were like, oh wow, dot notation is a lot cleaner, but how do we then make dynamic keys work? So that's why both of them exist. And in most people's code, you will see them use the dot notation instead. But I could easily change this to this, and it would do the exact same thing. Just when we're using dynamic values, which I don't think I did in this example, we would use the square brackets instead.
Like say you had one input box and you had a button that said make and another button that said model, and you had using bracket notation tied the value inside of that to the text of the button, so you could populate the input box for
Correct.
each value.
Yeah, I think I did bracket notation in that code snippet we did for you at the end of Tuesday, where we dynamically loaded the name of the key based off of the ID of the input. That is a good example of using bracket notation with a dynamic key. Okay, other questions about this? Or questions about any project? Would it be helpful if I went through and numbered this? Or you guys feel like you got a good handle on it?
You can number it.
Number it as one final go through? Number one, start interface with text box or question. Number two, placeholder to show the answers once they are generated. Number three, buttons to interact with for adding answers. Then we go to number five, which is in the JavaScript. Create empty array to hold answers. We ignore add poll answer because it's a function. We ignore generate HTML because it's a function. We ignore answer updated because it's a function. We ignore start quiz because it's a function. We ignore vote because it's a function. When we say JavaScript is an event-driven language, that sounds way more technical than it actually needs to be. When we say it is an event-driven language, all we mean is that the user can do something, the event, and the JavaScript can listen for that event and know what code to write. So think about an event-driven language as something that it just means an if statement that will happen when the user does this thing. If the user does this thing, then go do this function. That's all we mean by an event-driven language. So we come back up to 3, and we say for user clicks on add poll button. Number 5. Not 5, sorry. This should be 6. This should be 7. This function runs based off number 6. 8, we push an object with 2 keys into an array. With 2 keys, we'll say text and count as a placeholder for what gets entered. Number 9, call generate HTML function to update the HTML on the page based off the array from number 5. Start out generated HTML as empty. Loop over every item in the poll answers and get us access to the object and the index in the array. Use template literal to make an input for each answer. Store the index in data dash index. So when it is updated, we can access which one is getting updated. Store the value as or we'll just leave it as at that. Add on change that runs when the answer is modified. Add or update all answers div with the HTML we generated from number 12. When answer text field is typed in, retrieve the data index from the input that's being typed in from number 12. Yep. Update the poll answers text in the array from number 5. So our JS data is in sync with the interface. Wait for the start quiz button to be pressed. Regenerate the HTML that's displayed now in a non-editable format. Grab the question element. Make a H5 that has a value of either the element's value if it was a text input box, or the inner HTML if it was already turned into an H5. So again, this was required because when we are inside of, can I close it? When we're inside here and I enter in some question and an answer, when I hit start quiz, the first time this start quiz runs, it goes, gets my element ID of question and goes, oh, go get the value of whatever is typed into that. That value is some question. So when we hit start quiz, it shows up right here as the value. The problem is that when I vote on one of these answers, what happens is the vote recalls start quiz. Start quiz is going to come back up here. It's going to get the element ID of question, which is now this H5. This H5 no longer has a value because it's not an input box like it was the first time this function was called. So what we do is we say, hey, go grab the question element, which will exist, but it's either going to be an input box or it's going to be an H5. So what we do here is we say, if there is a value of the input, go use that. But if question element happens to be an H5 and there is no value on it, use the inner HTML of it instead. So this is like an if operator meets a ternary operator, right? It is saying, hey, if the value exists, use it. Otherwise, use the inner HTML of it. Okay, so if it is already turned into H5, 21, generate out a LI for each answer that has a button that displays the count. 22, update the HTML now with buttons and not editable. Wait for a button to be clicked on. Figure out the index of the button. Add 1 to the count of the answer from the array in number 5 that we added to in number 8. So keep in mind, poll answers here is going to be an array of objects. Those objects are all going to have the text and the count in them each. Then we come down here and we say number 26, rerun start quiz to update the HTML based off the array we updated in the line above. We come back up here and say 27, rerun this function based off calling it in number 26. And then everything is the same all the way up till here. And we say 28, everything is the same in this function, except now the question element is an H5. So grab the element, the inner HTML, instead of the value. And then we come down here and we say 29. The count is now incremented by 1, so show that number inside the button instead. Okay. Doable in one class. There may be simpler ways of doing it, but the important thing here is thinking through the engineering steps, right? And going, all right, what's the user going to do first? Well, they have to be able to type in a question. Okay, now they've got to be able to add an answer. Am I going to do that with one form field and keep track of all of the answers when they hit the enter button on it? Or do I want to add a button here based off of those answers? Okay, now what's going to be the data structure to store those answers? What HTML do I need to generate? Pause. Pat yourself on the back for getting that far. Then go, all right, what's the second half of this project? I need to make the start quiz button work. So I need to regenerate my HTML, but this time there won't be inputs that are editable. Instead, how do I want them to show up? Well, I still got to loop through them. I still need to process everything. I still need to have some way for them to vote on it. Okay, now that they voted on it, how do I know which one they clicked on? I got to keep track of that, and then I got to keep track of the count. And now that they've done that count, now I need to keep track of, well, how many votes has each one of these options gotten? That is it for the poll application. No, it's not easy, but hopefully we can start to see, hey, these concepts, no matter if I'm doing the polling app or rock, paper, scissors or the colors, I'm interacting with the HTML. I have variables, I have loops. I may have to pick a random item from an array. I might have to add an item to the end of the array, but those core concepts are the same all the way up to, yes, even the harder ones down here. You're working with more complex data structures or more data, but all of these can be accomplished with the exact same concepts of what we just used in the polling app. All right, this is officially the last day of JavaScript. So this is your opportunity to ask anything about concepts, about terms that we may not be familiar with, about any syntax, about anything that you thought was a stupid question and have been afraid to ask. Today is your day to do it. And I will put this example up in GitHub so you can reference it.
I really can't recall any questions right now, but I know that once I continue to practice, because I plan on building more of those projects, specifically the soundboard. I did 2 easy ones. I wanted to do the soundboard because it looks cool. I know I'm gonna have questions.
All right.
when I do that. So we could do a one-on-one maybe later.
Sure, of course. Or hit me up in Slack as they pop up. Adding form validation to ensure the question isn't empty. That's a really good question and one that will only take about a minute to add. What we can do is when we say start quiz, before we generate out the HTML of everything, we can basically say for let answer of answers of poll answers. And if there is not a answer.text, basically if the text that we set up right here is still empty, this is going to fire. So we're going to come down here and say, if there is not text, return an alert that says empty answer, can't start poll. And we can also do that for our question element, which I'm going to just move this down a tiny little bit so I have access to that question element. We can say if question element dot value this one is going to be a little bit trickier. I'm just going to do the answer validation for now. Go loop through all the poll answers, go pull each individual one out, check to see each one of them to see if any of the texts are empty. If the texts are empty, then return. Return is a special keyword that says stop running this function. We've already reached the end of it. It has some output for me. So this return will actually prevent everything from below it running if and only if this if statement is true. So loop through all of the poll answers, check to see if any of the answers don't have text in them. If they don't, return empty answer, can't start poll. So we come over here, I type in a question, I type A, I leave that one open and go to C and hit start quiz. It says empty answer, can't start poll. So form validation, there are all different ways of doing form validation. But that would be the easiest way of doing it. And then the other question is, how many lines of code would you say it would take to add a clear button and reset the poll efficiently? I think 2, 3. Be slightly different depending on if the poll is already started or not. But you could just add a clear and a clear here, and then say const clear is going to go back to my poll answers, set them back to empty, and then generate the HTML based off of those empty poll answers. So I come over here, I type ABC, I do 1, 2, I hit the clear button, and it doesn't work. Poll answers. Generate HTML.
Maybe you gotta put an empty string in there.
No, because I expected it to at least clear these out.
Did you update the HTML?
That should be done by the generate HTML function, which I call right here.
Oh, okay.
Loop over all of them. It should be an empty string. All right, well, let's debug by putting a console log in here and seeing if it hits this. And it's not. So there must be a problem with my on-click. Is clear? Yeah, clear must be like a special reserved word in JavaScript. So you can't name a function just clear. And then the only other thing we would have to do is document get element by ID question and set the value of it equal to an empty string. And now we can add things in, hit the clear button, and it resets us back to the way it was. Okay, any other questions?
Oh, I do have a question. Is your GitHub public or is it like you invited us maybe earlier, right? In the
This
past?
particular repository is public.
Okay. Thank you.
So not all of my projects are public, but GitHub does it at a repository per repository level. So the it's github.com/hackupstate/CIC-C6. Anyone can access that link.
Thanks.
And it is in Canvas with all the code that we do. Other questions?
Yeah, I got one. What the heck is a do while?
A stupid kind of loop. That's what a do while loop is. I feel the same way about do while loops as I do about switch statements. They're completely and utterly useless. So a while loop is basically a loop that runs based off of a condition, right? Just like a for loop does, right? The for loop, the inner condition is the center part of it. If you write a traditional for loop, that is. So a while loop basically says, let count equal 0, and while count is less than 10, console log the count, and then add 1 to the count. And so we get 0 through 9 printing out, right? Which makes sense. Hey, count starts at 0. While 0 is less than 10, it is log 0 out, add 1 to 0, count now becomes 1. Is 1 less than 10? It is log out 1, add 1 to it, keep on going. What a do while loop does is it says this loop will run no matter what. And then if the while statement is still true, it will run another time. So what we can do is we can say do this thing while the count is less than 10. Now it does the exact same thing. Hey, go do this thing. Okay, while is count still less than 10? It is, so go do all of this all over. The benefit of doing this is you could start the count at 20 and it will still run this condition once. It will still do this thing and then go do this thing while is 21 now less than 10. No, it's not. I'm not going to keep on doing this loop because the while part is no longer true. That is different than if we just said while the count is less than 20, now that loop will never run.
Then you might as well just do like the while instead of like the do part. Like I don't.
The thinking is there are sometimes that you want a loop to run no matter if it's true or not, and then based off of if there is still more things to deal with, then while you should keep running this loop. So that's the thinking behind it of, hey, I want a loop to run the first time that is not based off of a condition, and then figure out if it should continue running based off of the condition at the end. It's, again, one of those things, don't overthink it. I've never, ever, ever written a while loop or a do while loop in any of my professional code. I always use for loops, and I would say 90% of the time I use a for of loop, or a dot map if I'm in React. I use dot filters all the time, which are technically a loop. I use dot find and find index of a lot. Those are technically loops, but in the strictest form of what the loop types are, it is a for loop. The for loop can be broken down into kind of our traditional for let I equal whatever. It can be broken down into a for of, a for in. A for in is more for objects compared to a for of, which is more arrays. And a while and a do while. And out of all of those traditional for loop types, I would say I write a for of loop 90% of the time. The other 9% of the time, I will use a for let I equal 0 and I less than array.length, or there's some reason why I need to control how the for loop is running. And then 1% of the time, I may have a random for in or something like that in there. But it's one of those things that they're like, we need to teach you all the JavaScript under the sun, and it's like, yeah, but you'll never actually use those loop types. Or maybe I'm a bad developer and I just should be using more loop types and don't. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. I'm not the only developer in the world, and certainly not the best developer by any stretch of the imagination. Tiffany, you must have a crystal ball because we are spending all day on Monday talking about promises, async, callback hell, and set timeout. It was the one thing that Ryan requested that I cover before he comes in on Tuesday. So we're going to cover promises and asynchronous code and all kinds of fun stuff on Monday. It gets its own class topic. So very good question. But believe it or not, even with an hour of class left, not enough time to cover it all. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm stuck on this free code can about recursive functions. Like I'm not
Okay.
understanding what it's saying.
Let me. Recursion is one of those concepts that it's really easy for the computer to get, really hard for our brain to get, because it's basically Inception, right? Where you're going in a dream of a dream of a dream, where you're basically saying, hey, this thing, go call yourself again. Um, Give me 1 second. Okay. That will work. So I obviously relying on tools, right? So what's an easy example of recursion in JavaScript? And it goes, oh, factorial. And the first thing that goes off in my brain is math. There's nothing about math to me that makes it easy to understand an example, right? So I basically said, screw you, ChatGPT. How about an example that doesn't rely on math? And it's like, sure, no problem. I can do that. Like, oh, great. So the idea here is that you can have any number of levels of data in a folder, right? You can put a folder in a folder in a folder and have a file there, but you could also have a folder that has a folder and a file in it. So a very common data type for this is something like this, where we have the contents and we see that the type, whether it's a file or we see that it's a folder, and if it is a folder, the folder will have its own contents that will either have files or other folders in it, right? So this data structure doesn't make a ton of sense, but when you start pulling it apart, you can very much visualize this, right? You could actually say, oh, I can read through this as a human and go create all of these files. Well, now the problem becomes, well, how do I write a for loop or a while loop or even a do while loop that says keep on running this loop until you have printed out all of the files that exist up in this root folder? Well, how would you do that? Because there's no for let I equals, there is no file length, right? And I can't just stop at looping over the contents because those contents have files inside of those folders, which are inside of other folders. So now we run into this problem that recursion helps us solve by basically says, keep on going until you reach something that no longer has any contents inside of it. And the way we do that is by calling its own function over again, but with slightly different input. So the first time that we call the recursive function, we're going to give it the entire file system. Then that function is going to look inside the file system and go, there are still contents inside of it. So I need to go inside of its contents and go look for all of the files and print them out. Now, do any of those folders still have something inside of them? If they do, instead of passing this entire contents, I'm only going to pass this inner contents in it. So recursion is a type of a loop that changes by calling itself, but calling itself on slightly different input to eventually reach an end case, which is going to say there are no other contents left. So here is the print file system function. And what it's doing is it's saying, hey, log out whatever item name I am on right now. So when this starts, it's going to start with the root. Then it's going to say if the item type is a folder and that folder has contents, for every one of the contents, go print, excuse me, the file system. But now, instead of printing it from the entire file system, we're giving it a smaller section of the file system, this sub item. What is this sub item? The sub item is going to be this right here. So now print file system goes and it runs again. It's calling itself, but this time the item is going to start with the name. So it's going to print out file 2.txt, and then it's going to come back down here and go, oh, we also need to print out folder 2. Now go get the contents of that. It goes in, it prints this out, and then it goes, all right, there are no more contents. If the item type is folder, there are no folders inside this nested area. Therefore, I'm not going to call print file system, and the loop, the recursive loop, will be done running. Does that help at all?
A little bit. So is it possible that you could also like let's say you want to create a like a folder, you could just do something like just like the recursion part, just add like a folder or like I guess check if the folder exists, like using like the double ampersand or something like that.
Yeah, yep. That's basically what you're doing, is you're saying if there is another folder inside this folder, go open that folder and print out all the contents. Then if that folder has another folder in it, go inside of that one and print out all of the contents. But eventually you are going to reach a point where there are no more folders inside other folders, and that's when the recursive loop will stop. With all of that said, I'm happy to take a look at whatever problem that you're stuck on. Just Slack me whatever code you have for it and the name of the problem in Free Code Camp, and we can go over it. Okay, any other questions? All right, let's take attendance before we go on break. The secret word tonight is recursion. Once you are done attendance, you can go on break, come back at 7:25. One thing that we learned in the last cohort is that I have a slide deck called How to Adult, and it has all different kinds of concepts that I wish every high school taught and didn't. The problem is I thought I had an hour's worth of content and filled up the entire class with it. So instead of lecturing at you for 2 full classes, we will use this content and kind of break it up into smaller chunk-sized pieces. And I'm hoping that also gives you an opportunity to ask more questions about it and engage and all of that good stuff. So go on break, be back at 7:25, and we will start going through some of those topics.
I'm sorry, Max. I didn't catch attendance.
Attendance, the secret word is recursion,
Awesome. Thank you.
of course. Thing I wish I learned in high school, or that someone taught me, or my parents, or something, right? So I'm going to go through a couple of these. So this is meant to be a discussion, right? This is, if you want to weigh in on this stuff, feel free to raise your hand or just come off mute. These are all things that you have probably experienced at one point in your life. I never had it explained to you, or you have gone through it recently and had like a light bulb moment around it. So the reason why we go through these is because we're all in kind of a similar scenario. And so I think that it's it's important to teach you outside of just coding, right? And so these topics are not in any particular order. We'll do a couple. We'll go back to coding on Monday, and then as we have other gaps in the schedule, we'll kind of circle back to the rest of these topics. So starting with credit. It's kind of like wielding the force, or I'm just a nerd, right? We hear credit, and a lot of the times we think, oh, I have bad credit, and you just like give up at that without understanding that all credit is really an algorithm, right? And it's based off of several different factors. So your credit report and your credit score are two separate things, right? Everyone thinks they're, oh, I know my credit score is 600 or whatever it is, right? Your score is based off of your credit report. So think about your report as all of the input data, and the score is the resulting outcome. So it's really important to know you can get your credit report for free. It used to be once a year from all three credit bureaus. Now, thanks to COVID, they kind of changed that and haven't gone back. And so you can get your report. The only place that you can get your report for free and not be sold anything is annualcreditreport.com. If you haven't checked your report in a while, it's a really good idea to. There is a staggering number of people. I don't know the percentage off the top of my head, but I want to say it's like 10 to 20% find something wrong with their credit report, all because someone used your social security number and accidentally flipped two numbers in it, or it's really a staggering number of people who find something wrong with their credit reports. So anyway, 35% is based off of your payment history. No surprise there, right? 30% is how much do you owe? How are you using your credit right now? 10% of that is based off of a MIPS. So believe it or not, they'll actually weigh a student loan and a car loan and a mortgage loan and a credit card and a personal loan. All of those are weighed differently. And yes, your credit score will actually reward you for using credit. The length of your credit history, obviously, you are a more secure person to lend money to if you have a history of it. And then 10% of it is new credit, right? Hey, have you opened any other credit cards or any other credit usages recently? Annual credit report is what I already mentioned. If you do review your report and find anything wrong with it, you can open a dispute with that credit agency, and they will go through a review process and hopefully get that updated on your report. Accuracy is really, really important, because even though you may not be thinking about using credit now, down the road, that can really come back to bite you when you are going to purchase a house or a car or something like that. Delinquencies are the major cause for concern. That's the number one thing that you want to get resolved. And a lot of people think, oh, I know I have that past due bill, I just got to deal with that. You can negotiate on those delinquencies. Those delinquencies are going to be sent to a collections agency, and they are just hoping to recoup some money that they lost. So you can actually go through and negotiate with those with the collection agencies and say, like, hey, I know I owe $500, but can we set up a payment plan for $400 once a month over the course of the next 4 months? And they'll actually negotiate with you. It's kind of like buying a car. You can go back and forth and broker on that. And most importantly, come up with a plan of attack if you do have any delinquencies, right? At the end of the day, if you don't have any money left in your budget, there's only so much stress that you can have over your credit report, right? But once you do get to that point that you do have a little bit more money coming in, you say, all right, I have a couple $100. How should I spend this? How should I go about fixing my credit? Coming up with a plan of attack is really important there, right? Some people say, say it's the debt snowball method, which means it doesn't matter what your highest interest loan is, pay off the smallest loan first. Because if you get that done, you no longer have monthly payments. You can take that and snowball into the next biggest loan, and eventually you get out of debt that way. So in general, it does not cost you anything to get your credit report if it is coming from annualcreditreport.com. It does not negatively impact your credit score. Be careful on websites like Credit Karma, because they will basically try to sell your data or take the data that you're authorizing them to access, and giving that out to advertisers and saying, oh, look, this person has really great credit. You should try and advertise to them. It is possible to get your credit score for free if you already have a credit card. Like Discover offers your FICO score for free. There are a bunch of different algorithms for that, but anyway, it is possible to get your credit score for free if you already have a banking product. But your report is always, always, always free. That's the number one thing to check if you haven't reviewed your credit in a while, just to make sure that there's nothing on it that you don't know about, or that isn't related to you. And you're like, I don't even know what this is. They will always give you a contact phone number to call and start tracing that down. Any questions about your credit report? Or any comments? Okay. So protecting your credit. This is something that a lot of people don't know that they can do, and they can do for free. If you're sitting here and you're like, I don't use my credit, I don't plan on using my credit anytime soon, I don't know what the big deal is. When's the last time that you heard about a data breach, right? Target was a big one a couple years ago, but it seems like every couple months now we hear about another data breach of social security numbers getting leaked, all different kinds of security concerns, right? And so the number one thing that you can do to protect yourself is freeze your credit. It is a bit of a pain because you do have to go to each individual credit agency. You have to go to TransUnion, Experian, and Equifax. All of them will let you do it online now. Please, 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 for the love of God, if you're going to freeze your credit, remember your username and password, or they will give you a PIN. And it will be like up to an 8-digit PIN. Please save that somewhere, because if you go to apply for a car loan or a credit card or are buying a house, anyone who is going to run your credit, even if it is legitimate, will come back to you and say, we cannot touch your credit. We cannot get your history. We have no idea what's going on with you, other than that it came back that your credit was frozen. So a freeze does not prevent any open accounts from reporting into your credit history. What it prevents is any new accounts from getting opened. So if you're thinking, well, that kind of makes sense. Before anyone is allowed to open an account using my credit, wouldn't it make sense for me to authorize that? That is exactly what freezing your credit does. And it takes maybe 3 minutes to go back in, as long as you remember your username and password or PIN, to unfreeze your credit. And the unfreezing is nearly instantaneous. It's not like you have to be like, oh, I'm going to apply for this credit card next week. Let me go in and unfreeze it. It is nearly instantaneous. I have hit the unfreeze button and then gone over and hit apply on an application, and it goes through almost immediately. So I strongly believe that every American should be freezing their credit. In fact, I believe in this so much that I have frozen my niece's credit, based off of with their parents' permission, of course. But their social security numbers obviously are not being used for any credit right now. But God only knows what data leaks will happen, what will happen as they're growing up. It is a little bit more of a pain to freeze a minor's credit, but I do believe that every American should have their credit frozen, and go in and manually unfreeze it when they are applying for credit, because you never know when someone is going to apply using your social fraudulently, and that can cause all different kinds of headaches. Freezing is free, unfreezing is free. It costs nothing to do other than a little bit of time. And this can all be done online for any adult. So just something to consider. save your password. Keep in mind that if you ever are applying for any new credit, the unfreezing process is even easier than the freezing process. You can do what they call a scheduled thaw, which means, hey, for this 2-week period, creditors can come in and review my credit history. And again, this does not affect any open accounts that you do have, but anything that is going to run your credit, you do need to unfreeze for that time period. There is something called a soft pull versus a hard pull. A soft pull is those credit card offers that you may be getting in the mail of like, hey, 0% balance transfer if you open up this new card. That is what they call a soft pull, which is they pulled your credit history, but it doesn't impact your credit history because you didn't ask for that credit. They just pulled your credit and said, hey, let's check to see if this person has a good credit history, is a good match for this product. A hard pull, however, is whenever you ask for credit. That can be asking for a credit limit increase on a credit card. That can be applying for a new type of loan, whether it's a car loan or mortgage or student loan or whatever it is. Whenever you ask for credit, that goes on your credit report. It stays there for 2 years. It impacts your credit score for 1 year. So keep that in mind. Creditors can look at how many credit cards or how many credit applications you've applied for, and it will ding your score a couple points every time that you apply for new credit. That's the hard pull. Soft pull doesn't impact you. So if you're saying, all right, I guess credit is important. Where do I get started? How do I build this? Some people have never had a credit history or have been in debt. Congratulations if that's your case. Or you may say, hey, I know my credit isn't great right now. How can I build that up? Because this is not building your credit is not something that happens overnight. There is no magic bullet. There is no way to double your credit score or add 100 points to it easily. A lot of that is based off of history and time. And so if you start solving and building your credit now, by the time you need to use it next, there's a good chance that because that time has elapsed and you've been doing the right things, you can really build your credit back up. Joe, you have a question or comment?
Yes, about soft and hard pulls. Is it true that when you're going to apply for a house, and I think or any other large purchase that the market understands that you'll be shopping around, that
Yes.
they will allow you to do multiple hard pulls and clump them in together?
Yeah, I can't remember what the time period is. It's shorter than what you would want it to be. It's either 14 or 30 days. And so what happens is multiple hard pulls are reported on your credit report, but the algorithm will group the dates together and only impact your score for one of them, basically. So they definitely, the way the federal credit protection laws are written, they definitely encourage you to shop around for different rates, whether that's a car loan or something as big as a mortgage. And so basically, you could apply to 3 or 4 different banks to get an idea of what the rates are. And all 4 credit pools would show up as hard pools, but then the algorithm, when it goes in, will only count one of them against you. So yes, very, very good point and good question. Okay, so if your credit is questionable, is dubious, or you have no history, a secured credit card can be a great place to start. This also may be triggering for some of you because you may have had a secure credit card that was an absolutely terrible experience, because banks love to prey on people with bad credit. And so if you just look at them the wrong way, they'll start charging you fees and ridiculous interest, and it gets almost as bad as a payday loan. So don't use a sleazy bank. My first credit card was with Discover. I still have Discover to this day. I find that they're really helpful. They've got great customer service. They work with you. But basically, a secured credit card is like halfway between a debit card and a credit card itself, right? So what you do is you give Discover, whatever bank you choose, $100, $250, $500 up front. And then over 6 months, you use that credit card and you forget that you gave them the $500 or whatever value you want to load onto it. Important to use that card, and at least once a month. Important to always pay that card off in full by the statement due date. And then at the end of 6 months, or depending on what period your bank says, they say, hey, because you have paid off your balance in full all of this whole time, we now trust you with a non-secured credit card, which are the vast majority of credit cards on the market. They give you your full $500 back or whatever deposit you put up front. And then they convert your credit card into a non-secured credit card, or what we would think of as traditionally. So it's kind of like a debit card in that you're loading the money into the account, but it is actually a credit card and gets reported on your credit history as a credit card, and is a really great way if you find yourself not getting approved for credit cards right out of the gate. A secured credit card is a much easier way of getting it, because to Discover whatever bank, there's very little risk, right? You're giving them the money up front, but then you're saying, hey, give me 6 months to show you that I can responsibly pay off this bill. And if I don't, you take the money out of my 500 and return whatever I didn't spend. So you can do a secured credit card with something as low as I think $100 or $250. And if you have found that you can't get your foot in the door for building credit, this is a very, very easy way to get started. Treat it like a debit card. Never buy something that you can't afford, right? That's how so many Americans are in debt. We are more in debt than any other first world country. Very, very important to keep that in mind of when you are using credit or building credit. Never buy something that you can't pay off. A lot of people think they can't pay their credit card until the statement is generated. That is complete BS. You can pay off your credit card up to every day. And so if you want to, you can buy a pack of gum on it or a cup of coffee and say, all right, I use my credit card this month. You give it 2 or 3 days for the charge to post to your account. You can pay it off and you're good to go. So a lot of people struggle with, oh, I made that payment or I made that charge a couple months ago or 3 weeks ago and I forget about it. You can turn on auto pay, which is a great option. But a lot of people think, oh, I have to pay it once the statement is generated. That is not the case. The other misconception is that if I'm using a credit card, I'm getting charged interest on that until I pay it off. That is also not the case if you are paying your statement balance in full every month. So the way it works, let's say you open up this credit card, it's January 1st. You buy a cup of coffee on it January 15th. Your statement is going to close February 1st, and then you are going to have roughly 15 days to pay off the statement balance. So you're going to pay off that coffee by the 15th. And as long as you do, you will not pay any interest on that cup of coffee or anything else that you have put on the card, as long as you have paid off the statement balance. So credit cards can be not only a great way to build credit, I mean, it's in the name, but it does not mean that everything you put on a credit card is getting charged interest if you are paying your statement balance in full every month. They say keep credit utilization under 20%, whether that is your secured deposit or whether that is your credit limit in general. I've heard some algorithms will go all the way up to 30%, but anything over 30% of your credit limit will start dinging you in your credit score. So 20 to 30% is roughly the amount that you don't want to spend any more on than the limit itself, if you can help it. Any questions about secured credit cards? And to be clear, I'm not trying to sell you on anything here. This is all purely educational because I just think more people should know about it. Okay, I think we talked about this a little bit. Statement balance is saying, all right, if you got that credit card open January 1st, you made whatever purchases throughout the month of January, your statement is going to close February 1st. And then let's say you buy 10 more things that are add up to $100 on February 5th. Well, your current balance is going to be your statement balance, everything that you spent last month, plus the cost of those 10 things. However, the only amount that you need to pay in full every month to avoid interest is the statement balance. So when you go in to pay your credit card and it says due by February 15th, you do not need to pay the current balance, which is everything that may have been added after the statement was generated. You only need to pay your statement balance in full every month. And that means no additional fees and no interest. When you don't pay your full statement balance, you lose what is called the grace period. And then every charge that you put on that credit card, the second it posts to your account, you are now paying a very high interest rate on each one of those charges. If that does happen, you want to stop using that card as quickly as you can, and really make sure that you get the full statement balance paid off, because it takes 2 full statement balance paid to restore what they call the grace period. No idea why they don't teach this. Well, I do. It's because they're greedy and they want to make more money off of you. But the only way that you avoid paying interest on credit cards is by paying the full statement balance. You do not have to pay the full current balance, only the statement balance. And keep in mind that if you lose the grace period, it can take up to 2 months to restore that and get that back. General questions on balances. Okay. I'm gonna skip the videos. If you guys want to watch the video, you are more than welcome to in that PDF. And sorry, I just noticed there was stuff in the chat. Sorry, let me catch up on that. I hate that Zoom doesn't play a sound effect. Amounts owed, technically credit utilization ratio percentage. Yeah, so credit utilization, is comparing the total credit limit to the amount of it that you're currently using. And so normally that is most looked at on a credit card that will have a limit. But yeah, that's what credit utilization ratio is. And again, you want to try and keep that 20%. Why is that not the default? Give me context of what that was for.
Freezing your credit.
Oh, because they can make money off of you by allowing you to open things that you don't realize are going to impact your credit. If I were a senator, I would pass a law to default everyone's credit to frozen, and then have you. I mean, I'm telling you, it literally takes less than 3 minutes to unfreeze it. The only pain is you have to unfreeze it at all 3, unless you know what agency they're going to pull your credit from. So it's not the default because it makes it harder for you to use your credit, and because of that, financial institutions will take advantage of you. Yes, definitely remember the PIN. Yes, some credit institutions will not pull it this very second that you send in your application or are applying for something. So there's no harm in unfreezing it for 14 days or 30 days, or permanently unfreezing it until everything gets processed, and then you go back through and refreeze it. Dispute results, it can take 30 to 60 days, they say. Sometimes there's back and forth there. I have heard that it's kind of hard to dispute things, but if it is if it is something like fraud where you're like, I really don't know what this account is, and you call them and you still can't figure it out, that's definitely a time to open a dispute case and get that information sent into them. 12-day period for mortgage pools. Thank you. I knew it was shorter than what I thought it was. And the frustrating part of that is that you'll like apply at 3 different banks, and then one bank will be like, oh, sorry, we're swamped with applications. We just processed all of your paperwork. Like, 15 days later, and you're like, come on, now it's going to count as another pool. So that is something to keep in mind. But yes, you can definitely do multiple hard pools, and it will only count as one, even though it will report as multiple on your credit report. Thank you for chiming in on all of that stuff. Sorry, I did not have the chat open. Okay. Why does all this matter, right? Let's say that you're buying a house, and I've got 2 examples here. Typical mortgage is 30 years. If you can do it in a 15-year mortgage, that's even better. Interest rates for most of the pandemic and slightly before were down around 2.25%, just as an example. We are not at 10% interest rates right now. Last time I checked, and I just saw a headline that they dropped, but we were somewhere around 6.5%. Back in the 80s, the average interest rate was closer to 18 to 20%. So that just gives you an idea of how much interest rates can vary. However, interest rates are not just based off of the market rate, they're also based off of your credit. So a bank is going to look at someone coming in with good credit and say, hey, there's a very good chance that they're going to keep paying off this loan. Because they are a lower risk to us, we won't collect as much interest on them. Compared to someone coming in with bad credit, they may say, oh, the market rate right now is 6.5%, but because you're a bigger risk, that risk, we need to recoup on that. So we're going to charge you a higher interest rate. So just because the market rate is 6.5, if you've got bad credit, they may actually ratchet that rate up. Anything below, I think, a 720 may start to impact your interest rate. And that is very specific on the bank or the credit union that you are using. So $230,000 is the cost of the home. I think that was the average home sales when I in the Syracuse area when I started doing these slides a year or so ago. 30 years, 2.25%. The interest paid on that is $86,500 over the cost of that 30 years. Compared to your bad credit, the interest alone is almost $500,000. That's why credit matters. When you are going to buy a house, those interest rates, one house is going to cost you $316,000. The other one is going to cost you almost $750,000. That is why interest rates are so important. And when we see, oh, interest rates are going up, yes, that's one impact of it. The other is your credit can directly impact the interest rate that a bank is going to offer you. Let me put this one other way. In a low interest environment and with good credit, you could buy a $600,000 home at a 2.25% interest rate over 30 years and pay that $225,000. That means the higher interest rate at a house that costs half as much, $300,000, 30 years over only 8.5%, means that the $300,000 house would actually cost you more than the $600,000 house in a lower interest rate environment. So you definitely can refinance, right? If the interest rates drop, if you can build up your credit, you're not locked in for the full 30 years of it if you can refinance. But that is what is so crazy and why the house buying market is so credit dependent in the US, because you can literally buy a house that is twice as expensive and pay less on it overall over the full 30 years. And of course, this doesn't factor in taxes and appreciation and resale and all of that stuff. But hopefully this gives you a taste of, well, why is all of this credit important? It's important because it directly can impact my interest rate. And obviously a mortgage is probably going to be the biggest use of credit you ever use. But I just hope that this shows you the impact of why interest rates are important and why your credit history is important when it comes to interest rates. Any questions on that? Yeah, you definitely can do a 30-year and pay it off in 15. You do have to make sure that the excess is going to principal. The amortization schedules are really interesting when you first buy a house. The first couple years that you're making payments, it's some crazy amount, like 3/4 of the payment you're making is actually going towards paying off the interest. And then obviously over time that flips and more and more money goes to paying off the principal. I actually heard someone say even if you do 13 mortgage payments a year, like if you take your tax return and just make it towards a mortgage payment, you can actually make a 30-year or 25-year. Don't quote me on that because I haven't done the math on that. But yes, you can really make a huge impact. And some loans will have an early payoff penalty. But if you're working with a good bank or credit union, that should not be the case, especially on a mortgage. A personal loan may be a little different because they're basically losing out on the interest you would have paid by paying it off earlier. But like I said, most of the time, if you're working with a reputable bank, especially on a mortgage, there is no early payoff. But that's all in the contract that you sign when you close on a house or open any loan. Okay, so that's all I've got for credit. Using credit isn't bad if you're responsible, right? I was always taught that all debt is bad debt and all you should be doing is be focused on getting out of debt. Bad debt definitely does exist. Those are higher interest situations. Those are when your creditor won't work with you. There's definitely a time and place for bad debt. But that doesn't mean that all debt is evil, right? Especially if you have a game plan for paying off the debt, which we're going to talk about in the next section. If you feel like you are managing it, if you feel like after making that purchase, you feel that the benefits of the purchase were worth paying the interest on that over time, and you knew the how much more you would be spending because you went in debt for that purchase, then it can be worth it, right? I have, I think, 11 different credit cards, which is not something that I am recommending to people. But I do cash back and points and all different kinds of crazy stuff because I actually like managing my debt as a game, feeling confident in my interest rates. And when I do have extra money sitting in the bank account, where's going to be the most effective place to pay that off. All of my credit cards are paid off every month, so I pay no interest on any of those purchases. Just something to consider if you're just getting started. If you have no credit history, I highly recommend considering just building that, because when you do need your credit history either repaired or just started, chances are it will be too late, right? They call it credit history for a reason. Just building up 6 months of credit, even with a secured card, can be really, really beneficial. If there's no early payoff penalty on your originating mortgage lender and they end up selling your loan to another bank, can the new bank change the pre-penalty agreement? I do not believe so. I know they cannot change the interest on that loan. They may have a different fee schedule. that would, I can't answer that confidently. I know they are allowed to change some things, like if they sell it off, and they go, oh, the penalty for a late payment is now $50 instead of 25 at your old bank. Oh, excuse me. They give me 1 second. Sorry. They are allowed to charge a different fee schedule for that. But for the vast majority of it, like the very important stuff around payment date and around interest and all of that stuff, they do have to assume the terms of the loan. So they may be able to change some of the fees, and I don't know what side of the penalty prepayment penalty agreement is there. I will say that they would have to notify you of that though, and then give you some option to opt out or shop around for a different supplier. With that said, the questions around the main point here is that in the U.S. mortgage market, oftentimes you will get your mortgage with a bank that you're familiar with. So let's say I bank at Bank of America. I shop around for 3 different banks. I get the best rate from them. I open my loan, and 9 months later, I get a letter in the mail that says we don't own your loan anymore. I'm like, what do you mean you don't own my loan anymore? Oh, we sold it. We don't want to deal with you. We're going to pass you off to this other bank, and they just assumed your mortgage. Now you're going to go pay Wells Fargo instead of Bank of America. Like, okay. And so you got to get all new logins. You got to go, change your payment information. You got to make sure auto pay is still on. You got to change where you send your payment, all of that kind of stuff. It's a pain. And unfortunately, there's very little you can do to opt out of it. With that said, my mortgaging bank is Geddes. They only have 2 branches in the area, but one of the reasons I picked them, or they only have 2 branches, period, they happen to be in the area, is that they own mortgages for the whole life of the loan. And they are a really small bank, right? So if I ever have questions, I call up Linda at Geddes and she always answers the phone and I have her extension number and she's like my point of contact, right? So you definitely want to shop around, and interest rate is probably more important than anything, especially with a mortgage. But with that said, there is a value to having a small local bank, especially if you know they will not sell the loan. So that means in 28 years, when I am going to pay off my house, I will still be making those checks out to Geddes, compared to a lot of the national banks, which will sell the loans to other providers. Any other questions? Okay, gonna go through these quickly. These were all myths that I thought are worth busting. Debt is debt. That is not the case. A personal loan or a payday loan will affect your credit a lot more than a mortgage or a car loan or even a student loan will. There are having a mix of credit, especially longer term credit, or credit that is tied to a asset, which is called a secured loan, like your car or your house, is considered better debt, and your credit score will reflect it. Checking your report will not hurt your credit score. Applying for other credit will. Opening a new credit account will. But if you go to annualcreditreport.com, that's a federal agency that's tied to all 3 of the credit reporting agencies, it will not impact your credit score one bit. There is not one single credit score. We hear about the FICO score all the time. Well, there are several different FICO scores. There's FICO score 8 is probably the most popular. There's another one called Vantage score. What are all of those credit scores? They are literally just algorithms, right? You guys are learning how we can write algorithms to solve for things and create some output. So keep in mind that when you apply for a mortgage, they actually use a different credit score than when you apply for a car loan. And they factor in still the same credit report data, but they calculate that credit score a little differently. Credit bureaus give good and bad scores. That is not true. They give a report, and then it is up to the scoring algorithm to pop out a number, right? Now, my bank may say we don't like risky lenders as much, so we consider a good score anything over 700. I may go into another bank and they may say, oh, we work with riskier lenders all the time. We consider anything over 600 totally fine. So there is no such one thing as a good credit score or a bad credit score. The scoring algorithms will have categories, but there's no one line in the sand that goes, this is good or this is bad. Another myth, your job does not get reported on your credit at all. Your salary does not get reported on your credit. Your credit report may have employment history on it, but it does not impact any credit score on the market that I know of. And the same goes for your demographics. Doesn't matter, gender, race, any of that. If it is on your report, it does not impact your score. I don't think I've ever seen that on a report, but if it is on there, it will not impact your score at all. A couple other myths. There's no such thing as a joint credit report. You can have a joint account, whether that's a checking account or two names on a mortgage or whatever it is. But you will still have your own separate credit reports, and those accounts will be reported on both of your reports. So no such thing as a joint credit report. Paying debts does not erase them. What does that mean? That means that once you pay off your credit card and close the account, that credit card stays on your credit history for 7 years, up to 7 years. If that is good history, that's great. If that is payment history that you have missed a couple months on, that is not so great. So paying them off, especially if it is a delinquent account, certainly will boost your credit score significantly, but paying off debts does not completely get rid of them. There is no magic person who can fix your credit. A lot of companies will say, hey, give us $100 and we'll boost your credit score. There are tips and tricks that they can do for that, but the only way to fix your credit is to come up with a plan and start attacking it, right? So there are legitimate government and fiduciary, which means they're not out to make money off of you. There are some legitimate credit services out there to help you fix your credit, but be very, very wary of any product that's saying, oh, for $9.99 we can fix your credit for you. Just not the case. And of course, your credit score does not measure your value as a person. You may not be in a financial situation where you can do anything about your credit, right? You may know that there are some delinquencies on your credit report that you need to deal with, but you may not have the means to do it. That does not mean that you are a bad person. It just means that balancing your debt with your credit is going to be a little bit tougher until you have the means to balance all of that out. Okay, stopping there. That is all I have to say about debt. Does anyone have questions? Some new information in there. Is this a little helpful for people? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, definitely big time, because I definitely did not like understand like any of the things that you like were talking about, or like nor like I haven't been like taught. So this is definitely good information to learn for sure.
Good. Good. Okay, on to finances. This is a little bit more of me in this section and a little bit less of just general information about credit stuff. I really love this quote: "Money is a terrible master, but an excellent servant." In other words, if you can put your money to work for you, and you can feel in control of it, it can really, really take you far. But the second that you are beholden to the money, the second that you are not managing your debt, you can really feel the crushing weight of all of that, right? And so let's talk about finances. A little separate than credit, a little separate than debt, just general money. Where to start? I think creating a spreadsheet of your entire financial snapshot is really important, right? Even if that's just, I have a checking account and a savings account, how much money is in them, how much interest are you paying, include any debt, any credit cards, the balance, the monthly payment amount, the payoff date, all of that kind of stuff, right? Because you have all these different accounts and you can say, of course I can sign into my bank, and of course I can sign into my car loan website, and of course I can, but once you get it all in one dashboard, it really makes you feel like you're in more control of it, right? So savings account, checking account, if you have a 401k from work, if you have an IRA, or SEP, or any of the retirement accounts, include that in there. A lot of people love using budget software. Mint, unfortunately, is now gone. YNAB, you need a budget, is what that stands for. I know some people really swear by that. I'm a spreadsheet person. I like to have all of the control and write all the formulas and do it myself. But there are some apps out there. So creating your entire financial snapshot, having it in one place, obviously make sure that file is secure, and that it's not going to leak out. But I found this really helpful. I've been in 2 comas, and I just know if I went into another coma, I want to have one thing where I go like, listen, here's the money that's going to come out of the account. Here's how to get into the account. Here's where I am financially, right? And so I've got fortunately a very trusting mother, but I know how overwhelming that would be to come into someone else's life and have all of that financial information, right? And so I really think that getting it in one place makes the items a lot more actionable. Budgets and financial pictures are not the same, right? So if you think, oh, I've been told I need to use a budget, I never stick to them, it's not worth it. That is very different than saying, hey, every 6 months or every year, I'm going to go into this spreadsheet, I'm going to update the values, I'm going to add in any new accounts that I've opened up. Having that financial picture is way more important, I think, than a budget. The budget can be the step after that of saying, this is how much money I should be spending, this is how I am spending it. But the financial picture, I think, is the better starting point to say, where is all of the money? What is roughly the balances on it? You may have that in your head, but having it in your head and out on paper is very different. Question on HYSAs, high yield savings accounts. I'm generally a huge fan of high yield savings accounts. They can be, right now, I think they're paying between 4.5% and 5.5%, somewhere in there, which will be significantly more than what your local bank is probably paying. They are free to open usually. They usually don't have any account minimums. It usually only takes 2 to 3 days to transfer money between your accounts. Really, really a good way to put your money to work for you. Of course, there is always a risk scale of, well, high yield savings accounts tend to be on the safer side. They are FDIC insured. Of course, you can go all the way up to higher risk, which is, oh, let me put my money in the stock market in some kind of bond. Next step up would be a market mutual fund, an individual company, and then you can go all the way up into crypto, and that's a whole nother world, right? So wherever you are keeping your money, make sure it's working for you, but also make sure that understand the benefits of making that money grow and the interest versus the risk of having that money there. in general, because high yield savings accounts are so low risk and they are still FDIC insured, if you have a couple $1,000s that you have just sitting in a local savings account making 0.25%, I would certainly consider a high yield savings account. There are a ton of great options out there. And NerdWallet is a good website to shop around interest rates and find the right one that works for you. Okay. Any questions on where to start? Financial snapshot. This doesn't need to look the same for everyone. You don't need a template to get started. Just start thinking about all the information that if you died tomorrow, you would like someone to know about where your finances are. And that is what you should be including on this list. I know I'm a very morbid person. We've got another section coming up that we will not do tonight about dying. Okay, when you start making money, first of all, not all debt can be paid off with your current income level, right? That's just the facts of it. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. Don't beat yourself up, but when you do, start adjusting your financial picture, right? Start going in and saying, hey, I'm noticing money's building up in this account. Should it be, where should I be allocating this money? Really watch out for consumerism. I think that this is so important. Consumerism is just the notion of, well, I'm making this much money. That means I can be spending that much money. And all of a sudden you end up with a house filled with Amazon packages of crap that you don't actually use, right? Or an expensive car that you're not actually going to benefit from. And it really does sneak up on you. All of a sudden you open your closet and you go, why can't I close my closet door anymore? And it's because you're buying a ton of clothes you don't really need anymore, right? Part of that's fast fashion, but that's all a part of consumerism. So knowing that that is something that is very easy for us to slip into, identifying it just like we do with imposter syndrome on day one, right? Of, hey, you guys are probably going to feel this some way at some point in the program, but if we warn you about it, you can be better equipped when it does sneak up on you. Same thing goes for consumerism. So just something to keep in mind there. Not saying I am a master of not being consumeristic, but Amazon knows my address very well. Let's just say that, but something to be on the watch out for. File your taxes every year. I know that this sounds like common sense to some people. You can, and I've had it happen. I've helped a couple friends file their taxes for free. You would be shocked at the number of people who leave thousands of dollars in tax refunds on the table, especially if you're on the lower income side, because they think, oh, I didn't make a ton of money, so why do I need to file my taxes? Well, chances are the lower you make, the better chance you have of actually getting a refund from all of the credits that are available. So you have to file your taxes every year. Yes, sometimes they come with a nasty surprise that my withholding was wrong or I owe money. But it is super important that you file your taxes. I use TurboTax. There's a free version of TurboTax. Last year, the IRS finally got their shit together and came out with a free version that you can file online directly through the IRS. I would recommend giving them a try. I've literally used TurboTax now for over a decade. I started filing my taxes at 13 because I opened my own business. You can file taxes up to 2 to 3 years, depending on when you're filing. You can file back, I should say 2021 as of today, maybe 2022. Don't quote me on that. But super important to do your own tax or to do your taxes or have someone do your taxes for you. Mow throughout freetaxusa.com is a software option. H&R Block, whether you use their software or go in person, it really is a lot easier than you think. And all of these softwares are going to walk you through step by step and tell you exactly what numbers you need to enter. So if you have been told that taxes are really hard, they are, but not for the average American, right? They're really hard for businesses. They're really hard when you start trying to claim all kinds of crazy credits. But If you did not get your stimulus payments, your tax refund could actually include a stimulus payment. And there's a section of organization coming up. We won't get to it tonight. Scan in your W-2, your 1099, and any other tax forms that you receive in the mail. Save your 1040 as a PDF, right? The final tax form that you end up filing. Save that as a PDF, have that in a secure place that you can access, and consider putting it up in the cloud. Why is this important? Because when you apply for a mortgage, they ask for your previous 2 years tax returns and all of the tax forms that you got for that year. And a lot of people scramble. Sometimes they can pull it down from TurboTax, but then those original W-2s and 1099s, most employers don't even have a digital option for you to get your W-2, and you got to go back to HR, and it's a whole nightmare. So definitely consider having all of those documents together as PDFs or a PNG or some kind of scan of them. And many of them are going digital. So sometimes you will get an email that says, hey, your tax form is now available, and you will not get it in the mail. So something to be considerate of. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to answer a question in the chat, and then we can get out of here. Would you recommend a credit union like Empower than a bank like Bank of America? What's the difference between the two? So credit unions are kind of like mutual companies, in that they aren't in it to make a profit. They're in it to help the people that they serve, right? And so it's kind of like being a shareholder in your own bank. And that's why credit unions tend to have higher customer satisfaction rates. But I think that that's true for any really small bank. So most credit unions will have a requirement, like you live or work in Onondaga County. Some of them, like USAA is probably one of the biggest credit unions. You need to have an affiliation with military, or have your parents be in military and have an open account. But the general public can't just walk in and say, hi, I'd like to open a USAA account. So most credit unions will have a requirement. Some of those requirements are as simple as, like I said, living or working in the area. I would recommend a smaller bank. If that happens to be a credit union, that's great. But I have had a lot of luck with smaller banks. I personally bank with Geddes, which is kind of my local bank, and my mortgaging company. I have an online bank that is called Bank 5 Connect. I absolutely love them because, again, you call the 800 number and like the same person picks up every time, and they'll go, oh, I don't know the answer to that. Hold on, let me go ask someone and I'll come back. It's not let me transfer you to someone else. It's not let me call you back. It's like they've always had amazing customer service, and I've really appreciated that. So Geddes is my local bank. Bank 5 Connect is my online bank. They have like 13 branches in Massachusetts. But Bank 5 Connect, the Connect part is like their fully online one. And then I also have an account with SoFi or Sophie. I've heard it both ways. They tend to be a little bit younger leaning. They are certainly a national bank. But that's who I personally bank with and can personally recommend. But really it's all about trust and getting a good feel from them. And if you're not getting that, chances are they aren't the right bank for you. So credit unions are great, and like I said, they normally have higher customer satisfaction. So I think that speaks to a lot of what you should be going for. Empower is definitely local in upstate New York. So they are I think a decent one. They're not my absolute favorite. The reason I like Bank 5 Connect is they refund all ATM fees up to $15 a month. So I can literally go to any ATM and they'll say, oh, you're going to get charged a fee of like $4. And I just hit yes on that. And then the $4 gets deposited back into my account at the end of the month. So I really like the credit refund and the customer service that I've gotten from them. I'm sure you guys all have some experience with banking, and feel free to share your recommendations. But those are just the three that I can personally recommend. Any other questions for the evening? Got organization coming up at some point. It's the next topic in our How to Adult. If you guys have any feedback, feel free to fill out the 30-second feedback form. I know a lot of this feels like lecturing, but as much as these topics are important to me, they may not be to you. So feel free to provide that feedback, and we can always adjust down the road. You've got one more day of me on Monday. We are going to learn about promises, synchronous code, asynchronous code, callback hell, and is that timeout? Did I say that? There's one other thing on the list. Anyway, that's what's coming down the pipeline on Monday, and then you have almost 3 full weeks off of me when Ryan comes in on Tuesday. Harley, are you going to touch on the stock market? I touch on retirement accounts, which overlap with the stock market, but that's a really good suggestion. So let me think about how to incorporate that in. I'm less of an expert on the stock. Well, I'm not an expert on any of this stuff. But there are definitely some like important things that I've learned about the stock market, mutual funds versus ETFs versus individual stocks, asking or order price versus like the actual price of, yeah, there are some things that I can definitely cover on that. So let me update these slides and I'll throw that in. The most important thing is Roth versus traditional, and I'm going to go down a rampage, and I apologize whenever I do it months in advance, because I'm going to sell you hard on Roth accounts. And it's really a gamble. There's no right answer between Roth and traditional. It's just where you think your finances will be in the future. So yeah. Mo, the high yield savings account was the HYSA that got asked about a little earlier in the chat.
Okay.
Bank rate and is it bank rate? And Nerd Wallet. Nerd Wallet is the one that I know for sure. If you just do a search for Nerd Wallet HYSA, they'll come up with some reviews and comparison of interest rates. Joe, you have a question?
Yes. Was the freetaxusa.com, was that the new tool that the IRS made?
It's been out for a while, but
Well,
it's,
they had the beta, right? And they just opened it up.
I've been using Free Tax USA since like 2011, but you
Oh.
can it is in there. Like when they go on the IRS website and for suggested websites, they have been on there for. But I've been using that for a long time. I've never paid the file protection, and it works perfectly fine.
There's one that the IRS just developed. It was in beta for a few states, and then they just like last week or something just opened it up to the entire country.
It's called IRS Direct File.
That's what it is, yeah.
And the pilot is now closed, but so is like tax season in general. But they did announce that they will be opening it up for the whole country next tax year. So if you have a couple years of taxes that you haven't filed, you do want to the list of software that's available to you is definitely smaller. But it's something that I'm telling you, I've personally helped out friends who had like thousands of dollars of refunds that they had just not claimed because they didn't file their taxes for a specific year. So I'm not saying that you will get as lucky, and none of this is financial or legal advice, but it is something really important. In order of people that you want mad at you, it basically goes me, the mob, and the IRS up at the top. Because if you piss the IRS off, oh man, they can do all kinds of stuff to your wages and your bank accounts, and it gets really ugly. So you don't want to owe the IRS money or even risk the chance of owing the IRS money. Not a good situation to be in.
Even the Joker paid his taxes.
All right, that's all I have for tonight. Have an awesome weekend, everyone. I will see you all on Monday, and then I am out of here for almost 3 weeks. I mean, I'm
See
still
y'all
around for
Monday.
one-on-ones and all that stuff, but you know. Have an awesome one, everyone. See ya.